Hello, everybody. We're back.
Good evening, and welcome to the Abyss, where it's dark, deep, and moist. We survived the Clown Motel.
Barely.
I still have nightmares about it. It was the spookiest thing I've ever done.
We almost got lost in the tunnels under the town.
Yeah, I wish we could do the tunnels. But anyway, if you don't follow us on YouTube, I highly suggest you do, because Clete put together a 45-second teaser trailer of what will be our full documented experience in Tonopah, Nevada, in the Clown Motel.
Everybody likes a good tease.
It promises something good to come. But Clete, how long until people can anticipate the full video being up?
Couple weeks. Depends on.
This is good.
I got to learn how to edit video, so we'll see how that turns out.
All right. Yeah, there's a lot going into it. We got a lot of video, a lot of audio that we got to piece together. We're definitely professionals here, so expect the best. But of course, we got 2 new beers for the evening. I am drinking Phantom Bride from Belching Beaver Brewing Co. And it looks like it's a collaboration between them and the Deftones band.
Oh,
I guess
damn.
they came together for a beer, and the can looks really fucking cool. But it's really good. It's an IPA, of course. I go for my IPAs. But Clete, what are you drinking?
I'm drinking a Highwayman Pilsner.
Highwayman?
Yeah, and whenever you want to go drive on the highway, you just buy a 6-pack of these and have your passenger drink them.
But yeah, we did it. We survived the Clown Motel. We got a lot of stuff coming up for you guys. And obviously, as we trek closer and closer to our 1,000 sub viewpoint, we're looking for our new destination. So if you have any suggestions, entertheabysspod@gmail.com, because we definitely want to travel a lot.
Spiderbomb.com. So what are we talking about tonight?
So we are doing a listener submission, one that was submitted by our good friend Kurtis. He wanted us to cover the brutal, grisly series of murders known as the Snowtown Murders.
Oh, damn. Sounds pretty good.
Also known as the Bodies in Barrels Murders.
Sounds familiar.
Bodies in Barrels. Yeah, I don't remember hearing about it. It was in the 90s, like 99. So I was only 8 at the time.
Got a body? Put it in a barrel. Problem solved.
You've seen Breaking Bad. You know how it goes.
Bodyinabarrel.com.
But I watched Late Night with the Devil. I enjoyed it.
I like that show.
Really liked it. Not a huge fan of the ending. I think it's hard to end a horror film, but I liked it. Like the old school talk show feel to it. I thought it was really cool.
Yeah, I like that show. I haven't liked a scary movie like that in a bit. It wasn't scary by any means. Like I was never like, oh my god, that's scary. But it was intriguing. Kept you watching.
For sure. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but when they talked about like some of his past, I was kind of like, okay, I know where this is going.
I met you under the tall trees.
I've never met you before in my life.
You know what that meant, right?
Yeah.
When he was referencing that? Bohemian Grove, baby.
The Grove, yeah. I said no spoilers, but that's fine. Go ahead.
That's not a spoiler. How's that a spoiler?
If it's not in the trailer, it's a spoiler.
I'm going to hit you.
But I also watched Terrifier. I think I was talking to you about it on the way up to the Clown Motel. It's that killer clown movie. It's definitely a B film. It was released like 2016, I want to say. There's a second one. The third one's coming out soon. Man, that shit was over the top gore, just shock factor as much as you can possibly get. I know you're not a huge fan of gore.
That's weird. I watched Terrified last night, but I don't want to talk about it. Terrified? Yeah, there's 2 films, I suppose.
Yeah, this one's Terrifier, and it's about Art the Clown. It's interesting. But I know we're talking about films a lot. You know what movie looks absolutely fucking nuts is Long Legs. Have you seen the trailer for that one?
No.
Okay, you should watch it. So the marketing for it has been really cool. Like some of the trailers have been like old school 15, 20-second YouTube shorts that are just really cryptic and like dark, and it's got Nicolas Cage in it, and it looks fucking nuts, dude. Like I think it's going to be one of the scariest movies in a while. I just hope it's not overhyped.
Yeah. Well, I'll be covering scary winter stories.
Winter stories, huh?
Yeah. Pretty exciting stuff.
So Snowtown, believe it or not, is in South Australia. So it's definitely not snowy and wintry, as you might assume by the name Snowtown.
Well, who the fuck cares? We're doing snowy, scary stories as well.
We're doing it live. Scary, snowy stories in May. Let's get down to it.
What a wonderful world.
All right, so jumping in to the story of the Snowtown Murders. So these murders, as I said, took place in Adelaide, South Australia, and was one of the longest and most publicized trials in Australian legal history. Another name given to this horrifying event is the Bodies in Barrels murders, given the fact that most of the bodies were found inside an abandoned bank vault, stuffed into barrels. An abandoned bank vault. So, let's jump into the crazy event, and a reminder to all of you listening and viewing our show that if you have any suggestions for us to cover, entertheabysspod@gmail.com. We will dive into any topic and give you a shout out on the episode. So again, thank you, Kurtis, for the suggestion, and let's dive into it. Between August of 1992 and May of 1999, 4 men committed a series of murders in and around Adelaide, Australia. John Justin Bunting, reminds me of John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. Every time I saw his name, I was like, God damn it, I can't get that out of my head. So John Justin Bunting, Robert Joe Wagner, and James Spiridon Velasquez were the main perpetrators, and Mark Hayden was convicted of helping them dispose of the bodies. The motivation behind the murders still remains unclear. However, the killers were made to believe from Bunting that the victims were pedophiles, homosexuals, or quote-unquote weak. In some of the killings, the murders were preceded by torture, and efforts were made to gain the victims' identities, social security payments, and bank accounts. You know, they just wanted to get all their money and just keep cashing those checks long after they're dead.
Good old SSI fraud.
John Bunting, Robert Wagner, and Mark Hayden had all been charged with the killings. James Velasquez pleaded guilty to 4 of the murders, providing a testimony in exchange for a shorter sentence. Although those 4 remain the main perps, there were several other people who acted as accomplices in either the murders themselves or simply the disposing of the bodies. John Justin Bunting was born on September 4th, 1966 in Inala, Queensland, and was identified as the leader of the perpetrators. At the age of 8, Bunting had been beaten and sexually assaulted by a friend's older brother. It was reported that he enjoyed weaponry, photography, and anatomy, and grew to develop a strong hatred for pedophiles and homosexuals. At 22, Bunting worked at a slaughterhouse and was found bragging about, quote-unquote, slaughtering the animals, saying that's what he enjoyed the most. I feel like, hey, I like to work at a butcher shop. Why? Because I just like killing shit. I just like to kill shit.
Just like cutting into meat. It's so great.
In 1991, he moved to Salisbury North, South Australia, befriending his neighbors, Mark Hayden and Robert Wagner. Little did they know that they're going to make friends with the ringleader of their murder cult. What'd you do, Clete? Your neighbor walks in, or your neighbor moves in next to you, comes over, he's like, hey, do you want to go kill some people?
You want to join my suicide cult?
You're like, hell yeah, I do. Bring your chainsaw.
Wood chipper. I noticed he had a wood chipper, and I wanted to ask you if you wanted to be in our suicide cult.
We have a series of wood chippers. Just chain them all together. Robert Joe Wagner was born November 28th, 1971, in Parramatta, New South Wales. He, being neighbors and friends with Bunting, was encouraged to assist in various murders. James, or Jamie Spiridon Velasquez, was born December 24th, 1979. Velasquez, along with his mother and half-brother, actually lived with Bunting for a time and became drawn into helping with the killings. At the age of 23, Velasquez assisted in the torture and murder of his half-brother, Troy Eude, and stepbrother, David Johnson. He confessed in 2001 to 4 of the murders, including those of his stepbrother, becoming a key witness for the Crown. With the details he provided and supporting evidence gathered, Bunting and Wagner were able to be convicted. Velasquez was sentenced in 2002 to a minimum of 26 years and was held in isolation in an unidentified South Australian prison. This is the crazy part, is Velasquez's mother, Elizabeth Harvey, had known about the murders and was even talked into helping with one of them by Bunting. So he recruited this guy and this guy's mom. He's like, hey, do you want to help us kill someone? And she's like, sure, why not?
Mom, make me some lasagna. I need to kill this guy.
And she's like, ooh, that sounds nice. Do you need help? Shortly after Bunting, Wagner, Vlasakis, and Hayden were taken into custody, she unfortunately died from cancer.
How unfortunate.
Mark Ray Hayden was born December 4th, 1958. Hayden was initially the subject of suppression orders or statutory provisions prohibiting publication. Therefore, he was unable to be identified as anything other than an alleged perpetrator. Alleged. In January 1999, he reportedly rented the abandoned State Bank building at Snowtown. The jury deadlocked on the murders of Hayden's wife, Elizabeth Hayden, and Troy Yude, but were not retried when Hayden pleaded guilty to helping the killers dispose of the bodies of both Elizabeth and Yude. Hayden's wife's sister, Jody Elliott, a woman described as having below-average intelligence, had become besotted with Bunting. She pretended to be Suzanne Allen, a deceased former acquaintance of Bunting's, in an effort to receive her Social Security income. Her son, Frederick Brooks, was later killed by the group. He just brings all these people in and then just murders half their family, dude.
Yeah. Nuts. It's like a weird pyramid scheme? Yeah, it's a weird pyramid scheme.
It's what they call a murder pyramid. The victims were selected completely randomly by Bunting for imagined infractions. Some of the victims had been murdered because Bunting suspected them of being pedophiles based on nothing but flimsy evidence or even rumors. Other victims were unfortunately picked due to Bunting's dislike of obese people, drug users, or because they were homosexual. Most of the victims were friends or acquaintances of someone in Bunting's group. Some of them had been family members who occasionally shared a residence with one of the murderers. Bunting was said to befriend some of the victims for a short time as a means to draw them into a group as an easy target. This guy's just a dick. He's like, hey, you look like a cool guy. Come be friends with us. And then he kills them. He murders them. This guy's a fucking monster.
He just seems like a hateful guy, man. Like, I don't know what's wrong with him.
A forensic psychiatrist from Broadmoor Hospital in the UK named Kevin Howells suggested that Bunting's behavior suggested a lack of emotion and inability to empathize with the victims. This led to the conclusion that Bunting was a psychopathic killer who derived immense satisfaction by controlling his victims. He forced his victims to call him God, Master, Chief Inspector, or Lord Sir.
Lord Chief Inspector. I like Chief Inspector. God complex,
does he? Yeah.
I like Chief Inspector.
Yeah. You will call me Chief Inspector.
So he's a schizophrenic psycho, yeah?
Yeah, with a God complex.
Maybe I'm the one.
Maybe. I haven't heard that song in forever.
Ah, gotcha.
Good old puddle of mud, huh? During the time of the murders, Bunting constructed what he called a rock spider wall on a wall in a spare room of his home. This chart, made with paper notes and wool, created an interconnected web of names that Bunting alone suspected to be pedophiles and homosexuals. Now, again, he didn't have any proof. He's just like, I believe that these people need to be killed because they're either a homosexual or a pedophile. He would choose a name on this wall and begin to threaten them, threatening that they would get what's coming to them. So he's just like, eeny, meeny, miny, this guy. We're gonna go pester him, and then we're gonna murder him. As mentioned earlier, the victims. As mentioned earlier, the victim's social security and bank details were obtained after the murders, so that Bunting and his crew could impersonate them after their death in an effort to collect their pensions. Social security fraud wasn't believed to be the main motive, however, even though a total of $97,200 was collected.
Damn.
Almost $100,000 in
It was a while ago.
Collected.
It was a while ago, right?
92 to 99.
Damn.
So, I mean, still a lot of money. Today's day and age, that does nothing. Fucking pennies. Okay, so before we get into the victims, we're going to go ahead and pass it over to Clete for some wintry, scary stories.
All right, thanks, bitch. Let's see
what
here.
What the fuck is wrong with you? All right.
This one is called The Search. When I was growing up and living in the suburbs, it was always my plan to move into the city when I was old enough. I didn't learn to drive a car and took trains and buses everywhere that I went. There didn't seem to be much of a point to having a car and living in the city when having a car would just cost you even more money and difficulty for parking and such. I agree with that.
I don't want a car because that means that I'm going to have to park it.
Dude, if you've lived downtown, even driving downtown in Salt Lake City, dude, it's a pain in the ass.
I hate it. I hate it.
Don't get me wrong, I love my car.
That's why I would never live in New York, dude. That just seems like a pain.
Dude, fuck New York. All right. Things weren't really great at home with my parents. They were the sort who said things that made you really believe they wanted their kids out of their house as soon as possible. They didn't encourage me to go to college or anything like that, and didn't ever make plans to do so. My life basically had me moving out when I was forced to, and then probably working at a fast food or retail job for a long time.
It's like, we just want you out of the house. Go away.
Wouldn't it be great if you just got a job at McDonald's and left?
Hey,
That'd be great.
Sounds good. You not living here anymore. Go get a job.
I graduated a semester early simply because I could. So that also meant that since I wasn't going to college, I had to start looking for a place to live. The semester finals were over in January, so that is when I would start looking. I lived outside of a large northern city, so the winter was going to be a very rough one, and it was going to get difficult to be looking for a place to live in the city. I had a job working in the suburbs. I was going to do the opposite of what most people did. People tended to live in the suburbs and work in the city. However, I had seen the fast food and retail places in the city and had no desire to work there. So I wanted to live there, but I planned on keeping my job in the suburbs. Plus, going backward against rush hour on the trains would be a pleasant experience. This guy, man, he's hacking the system. I immediately found it really difficult finding a place to live. I was an 18-year-old high school graduate with no credit history or living references. I didn't want to get a roommate. I wanted to find a studio apartment and live by myself. This made finding a place even more difficult, but I kept looking for a place. I had an appointment to look at a studio in a building a little further north than I wanted to live. The building was also very old and in not a great part of town, so I wasn't really sure that I wanted to live there. However, I told the building manager that I would think about it and that I would get back to him.
I mean, look, sometimes you gotta live in a shit place for a minute.
Yep, it's true. At that point, it was very dark outside. It was very, very cold too, and it had started snowing when I began walking to the train station. I was trying to save as much money as possible for moving, so I didn't take a bus back to the train station. It would be a bit of a walk, but the cold and the snow didn't bother me at all. Since I was pretty far north in the city, and it was snowing pretty hard outside at that point, there weren't a lot of people around. It was one of the reasons I had considered not wanting to move there because I wanted to be around people. I walked under the tunnel that was just before getting to the train station, and there was some guy who was leaning up against the wall under there. When he saw me, I could tell he was going to say something to me, which made me uncomfortable. I didn't like it when people I didn't know on the street talked to me. Well, I thought he was going to ask for some change, and I would give him some. I had my hand in my pocket in order to get some.
If you don't want random people talking down the street, just start screaming at them. Like blood-curdling, just screaming.
No, just talk to yourself. They were just supposed to help me, and they didn't help me. Nobody helped me.
It's like, that guy is nuts. He's
lost
it.
However, the guy asked me if I wanted to buy some weed off him, and I was caught off guard. At the time, I didn't smoke the stuff, so I made an awkward comment, turning him down. It seemed like my awkward comment offended him, though.
Get your dank-ass weed out of here, bitch.
He got really...
Just say no, buddy.
Like, what did he say? He probably went, no. Oh. He got really angry at me really quickly and started accusing me of disrespecting him. I tried to ignore him.
I want to know what he said. Like, what's so disrespectful?
Well, he's just like, maybe it's just how he said no.
Buddy?
Sir, would you like some weed? No, bitch! Gotcha, bitch!
All right, Dave Chappelle.
I just tried to ignore him and just went on my way, but that only seemed to make him even angrier at me. I was beginning to get scared and just wanted to get up to the train station. The drug dealer demanded I stop and come back to him. I really thought that the best thing I could do was just ignore him, but I was really wrong. That only got him angrier at me. The guy grabbed me from behind, shocking me, and pushed me up against the wall of the tunnel. It was then that I realized he had a knife on him. He held me against the wall with the knife, talking about how I disrespected him. I denied doing so, telling him that I only wanted to get to the train and get home because it was cold outside. However, that didn't seem to convince him, and he was seriously angry at me. I don't know what I would have done if suddenly 3 people turned the corner and were walking under the tunnel. The drug dealer very quickly hid the knife in his coat and moved away from me. He actually took the moment to move toward the 3 men, I assumed to try and sell some weed to them or something. And the guy's just trying to support his family with a business. That's all.
Yeah. He's like, I don't want to kill you anymore. I need to sell this weed.
I knew I was thrown a lifeline, and I took it. I quickly moved out of the tunnel and up the stairs to the train station. I went inside the small station, which had an attendant, so I was relatively sure that I would be safe there. When the train eventually came, the drug dealer was on the platform watching me. I thought he was going to get on the train too, but he didn't. However, he watched me as I sat down at the window and showed me his knife as the train sped away. Needless to tell you, I didn't take that apartment.
So, moral of the story, if someone offers you drugs, just say yes.
Yeah, that's it. Or you could have mooned him while the train was going away.
There you
go. There's your disrespect. There you go. This one is called The Walk. After my parents got divorced, I really disliked being with my dad. My dad and mom still lived in the same neighborhood, although not really close together. I spent most of the time with my mom, although I had a room at both of their houses. My dad had gotten really depressed after the divorce. He spent a lot of the time that I was with him drinking and not really paying much attention to me. I only spent the occasional weekend over at his place, and only when he insisted on it. And since I was spending Christmas with my mom, he insisted that I spend the weekend before Christmas over at his place, so my parents arranged that. I was 10 years old at the time. I think it's important to know if you are to understand some of the decisions that I make in the story. It was a pretty lousy day ever since I walked home from school to my dad's place. It has been snowing pretty heavily all day, so walking to the house caused my feet to get pretty soaked because of the snow. Once I had arrived at my dad's place, he had already began drinking, so the night wasn't going to be great. The only thing I liked was the fact that it was snowing outside, so I sat in the window, drinking hot chocolate and watching the snow fall. Well, my dad drank so much that he eventually fell asleep in his easy chair.
That's a good dad right there.
This wasn't unusual, but it made the night as bad as any other. I was only 10 and really didn't know what to do being in the house basically by myself. It wasn't the first time that I completely had to take care of myself, but I didn't really care for it. It seemed like I was wasting my time and my night being at his house. That's when I got a brilliant idea that I should just walk over to my mom's house. I had made the walk before and it was a bit of a long walk. I also wasn't supposed to be out so late at night. I also thought that my mom might be asleep or out of the house, but I couldn't stand spending more time in this house with my passed out father. And then I set out into the snow. It had really been snowing hard, and it had been building up on the ground. That made it much harder walking out there than it had walking from school, but I was determined to make it back to my mom's house. I was moving really slowly through the snow. As I walked by each streetlight, I saw how hard and heavy the snow was falling. A few times I felt like I should turn around and go back to my dad's house, but I figured it would be fine when I finally made it home. I had gotten maybe about halfway when something happened. A door opened and an older man came out on the porch. He started talking to me, asking me if I wanted to come into his house and get warm.
Oh, some popsicles in the cellar.
He said it was way too cold and wet out there, and if I came into his house, he could call my father for me to come pick him up. I waved him off, telling him I was fine. He's like, "Get away, pervert." I was just trying to get home and could make it there on my own. That's when he started offering me things like hot chocolate and fudge if I came into his house.
Those are 2 things I'm going to have to pass on, buddy.
I got some rich fudge for you. Real hot fudge.
Get some hot chocolate. I got some fudge. I got some Snickers bars. I got some fudgicles. I got some chili.
He was making me feel uneasy because I wasn't supposed to talk to adults that I didn't know. I wish that I could have walked faster, but I would have had to walk in the street for that, and I wasn't allowed to do that either. I wanted to get away from him because I didn't feel good with him talking to me. I didn't like talking to strangers. When I tried to go on, I noticed him from the corner of my eye. The man began coming down his front walk quickly, coming right at me. I didn't think much about it, but got scared out of my wits when he grabbed me by the arm. He started trying to pull me toward the front walk, and I knew he was trying to get me into his house. I was terrified, and I struggled my best to get away from him. I began screaming out and yelling at him to let me go, but the guy was dragging me, and since he was a lot bigger than me, he was winning. There was no doubt that he was going to get me into his house. I got extremely lucky, however, as a snowplow was coming down the street at that time. It caught the attention of the man dragging me. I was able to use the icy slickness of the sidewalk to knock him off his balance and onto his butt. Then I jumped over the snowbank, separating the sidewalk from the road and in front of the snowplow. The man who had grabbed me got up and started running back towards the house. The snowplow stopped, and a big man got out of the cab. I ran over to him and told him that the man in the house tried to abduct me, and could he help me out.
Sorry, I literally thought that he was going to, shove him in front of a snowplow.
And then he died.
Murder his ass. I was like, holy shit.
And then
This story just got dark.
The street was streaked in blood. And then I just ran.
The snow was red that year.
The driver let me into his truck, and he used his phone to call the cops. He waited in front of the house until they arrived, which took a while. But when they arrived, they went in and confronted the man in the house. He was arrested for attempting to abduct me. The police then took me home to my mom's house. I did get in some trouble for attempting to walk in the first place. Mostly, my parents were both happy nothing happened to me. That was the closest call I've ever had in my life.
All right. So we're going to now get into the victims of these four monsters in the Snowtown Murders. Clinton Douglas Trezise, who is 20, was beaten and bashed to death with a shovel in Bunting's living room in Salisbury, South Australia. He had been invited inside on August 31st, 1992, where he was then accused of being a pedophile. Bunting referred to him as Happy Pants after the murder. He was found buried in a shallow grave 2 years after his death at Lower Light, South Australia. Ray Allen Peter Davies, who was 26, was an intellectually disabled man who had a sexual relationship with Suzanne Allen, which was Bunting's ex-girlfriend, in 1993. Bunting claimed that Elizabeth Harvey had stabbed him in the leg, and then Robert Wagner had strangled him with jumper cables. They then took his unconscious body to the town of Bukhara, South Australia, where they tossed him into a bathtub and bashed him in the genitals with the end of a pole until he died.
Oh my God.
Yeah, dude. These guys were just hateful, sick sons of bitches. Literally bashed him in the nuts until he died. They found his body in another shallow grave on May 26, 1999. Suzanne Allen, who was 47, was found buried at Bunting's house on May 23, 1999, wrapped in 11 different plastic bags. Her death was one of the several concealed by Bunting in order to collect her pension. Bunting claimed that she had died of a heart attack, but law enforcement suspected that she was murdered when their relationship went to shit. Murder charges were eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence. Michelle Gardner, who was 19, was a transgender Australian woman who lived with Nicole Zarita, a cousin of Wagner's wife. Shortly before her disappearance in September of 1997, Gardner was playing with Wagner's children in the front yard. Gardner had grabbed one of the children and placed her hand over their mouth, which infuriated Wagner. Bunting and Wagner took her to Murray Bridge, South Australia, where they strangled her in a shed, forcing her to stand up every time she collapsed. They then staged a robbery at Wagner's home, pinning it on Gardner, stating that she needed money for a sex change operation.
It's a perfect crime.
Yeah. Gardner's body was kept in a barrel in the shed before being moved to Snowtown, being found on May 20th, 1999. Her right ear had been covered by a slip knot in a rope that was wrapped around her neck, and her left foot had been cut off so that the lid of the barrel could be shut. Just didn't fit with that left foot, man.
We're going to need a bigger barrel. No.
Yeah. Vanessa Lane, who was 42, was Wagner's ex-partner. She was in a relationship with Wagner when Bunting first moved to Salisbury North. Bunting accepted her into the circle of friends because she had kept him informed of the local pedophiles, or so he claimed. Shortly after Lane was accused of molesting a young boy, Lane and Wagner's home was firebombed, which caused Wagner to leave her. Bunting and Wagner picked her up from her house on October 17, 1997, and forced her to call and verbally abuse her mother, who could hear them in the background prompting her on what to say next. That's just sad, man. Like, you get a call from your kid, and they're just, like, saying the nastiest shit, but then you can hear people in the background like, hey, say this to her. Like, as a parent, I imagine that's one of the worst fucking things you can go through.
It's an oddly specific scenario, but sure.
Yeah, that's what happened. They tortured Lane for information about her bank accounts by crushing her toes with pliers, ultimately strangling her to death. Bunting then took claim of her vehicle and welfare payments. Lane's dismembered body was found on May 20th in a barrel in the bank vault in Snowtown.
How many people are on SSI and welfare in this tale?
That's what I want to know, man. He
Jesus.
stole almost $100,000 worth. So, yeah, a lot. Thomas Eugenio Trevillon, Lane's last partner, who was 18 years old, suffered from paranoid schizophrenia, leading him to believe that he was a soldier, so he always wore army fatigues. He lived with Lane from April to October of 1997 and ultimately helped them kill her. Bunting said that Trevillon was going mental after he tried to kill Wagner's girlfriend's dog with a knife on November 4th, 1997. Like, he literally picked up a knife and was, like, chasing the dog around the front yard trying to kill it. And he's like, yeah, you're going mental. You're a problem, so you're our next victim.
To be fair, that was a Russian spy.
Bunting and Wagner drove Trevillon to Carisbrooke in the Adelaide Hills, where he was forced to lean against a box with a noose over his neck. He was discovered hanging from a tree in Humbug Scrub the next day. Humbug Scrub. That sounds like the kind of place that I want to live.
Your homie's right on the passenger side.
Humbug
Trying
Scrub.
to holler at me.
That came out of nowhere, but I'll take it.
Heard it on the radio today. I was driving to the park.
I don't know the last time I've actually listened to the radio. It's all Spotify for me. The coroner determined the death to be a suicide, given the prior suicide attempts. Gavin Allen Porter, who was 29, was Velasquez's friend. He was diagnosed as schizophrenic and spent many years in mental institutions. Velasquez and Porter were both heroin addicts. Bunting referred to Porter as a waste, who no longer deserved to live. Can you imagine, like, hey, you know what, buddy? You're a waste. You're just a fucking waste.
We're going to have to kill you. Yeah, sorry about that. I know it's almost the weekend, but...
Bunting had been pricked by a used needle that Porter had left on his couch in the living room, which led Bunting to decide that he was the next victim. I mean, to be fair, I'd be pissed too if I sat down and got a freaking needle in me from someone else. I wouldn't kill him, but I'd be fucking furious.
Yeah, goddamn needles.
Porter was asleep in his parked car, which was on Bunting's property, when he was attacked by both Bunting and Wagner. He awoke and managed to stab Bunting in the hand with a screwdriver, before ultimately being overpowered and strangled. His body was displayed to Velasquez before being shoved in a barrel for disposal, and he was found on May 20th, 1999. So he's like, here's your friend, just wanted you to see him. All right, he's going in the barrel he goes. Troy Eude, 21, was Velasquez's half-brother that we had mentioned earlier. Velasquez confided in Bunting that Eude had sexually abused him when he was only 13. They beat Eude while he was asleep in bed. Velasquez handcuffed him while the others tied him up. They dragged Eude out of bed and into the bathroom, beating him once more, demanding his financial information. Bunting used a pair of pliers to crush his toes as he coaxed him to repeat a string of numbers, words, and sentences that he had pre-recorded. Eude was eventually strangled to death, and Bunting created messages from him and other victims that he would use to inform their family and friends that they would simply be going away. Frederick Robert Brooks, 18, was the son of Jody Elliott, who was the sister of Hayden's wife. Bunting had gotten the idea that Brooks was touching up young girls, repeatedly telling the others that something had to happen to him. In September of 1998, Brooks received notification that he was accepted into the Australian Air Force Cadets, receiving an invite to join Bunting, Wagner, and Vlasakis at a party. They tortured Brooks in a bathtub where they handcuffed him and thumb-cuffed him. They inserted lit cigarettes into his ears and his nostrils, and a lit sparkler was shoved up his urethra.
Oh my God.
Dude, when I was researching that, I literally was like, my butthole puckered hard. He was then forced to speak into a recording device, divulging his bank information. They injected bleach into his testicles with a syringe, which was wired to Variac, which sent electrical impulses through his body. His toes were also crushed with pliers before choking to death on his gag. His body was among those found in the barrels in Snowtown. So yeah, I don't know. It's just, why? I don't know. It's just disgusting. Gary O'Dwyer, who was 29, was Bunting's neighbor and was both mentally and physically disabled. Bunting would repeatedly call him homophobic slurs. Bunting and Vlasakis worked together to learn the details of O'Dwyer's financial institution and whether or not he had any family. O'Dwyer's income from disability benefits was the financial target in this situation. Vlasakis arranged a get-together for drinks with O'Dwyer and some quote-unquote friends. Bunting set out to get O'Dwyer drunk, and after 20 or so minutes later, Wagner grabbed O'Dwyer around the throat, proceeding to torture him for hours on end. O'Dwyer's body was taken to Hayden's home and placed inside of a barrel.
I'm getting Roger Rabbit vibes here.
Elizabeth Hayden, 37, was Mark Hayden's wife. Bunting was told by Hayden that he had informed his wife about the murder. So he's like, yeah, I told my wife everything. It's not a problem, is it? Bunting hated Elizabeth and saw her as an issue with her knowledge of what they had done. Wagner also hated her, claiming her to be a whore and a lowlife.
Loose thread? Put her in a barrel.
On November 21st, 1998, Bunting and Wagner had arrived at her home, where she was alone, seeing as her husband and kids had gone out for the night. She was dragged into her bathroom, tortured, then killed. A rope was around her neck and a gag was taped into her mouth. Purportedly, later that day, her husband was shown her remains, which caused him to laugh. Her body was placed in a barrel.
That's a regular response. No further questions.
David Johnson, 24, was Vlasakis' stepbrother. Bunting hated him because he was fastidious with cleanliness, and his appearance made Bunting refer to him as a yuppie and other homophobic slurs. On May 9th, 1999, Vlasakis told Johnson that there was a computer for sale that was real cheap in Snowtown. Johnson agreed to go with Vlasakis to purchase it. He was immediately overpowered when they entered the building. Johnson was the only victim who actually died in Snowtown. A piece of Johnson's flesh was fried and eaten by Bunting and Wagner, which at this point just seems egregious and out of the blue. Like, this entire time they were just killing and stuffing in barrels, and this time like, let's just eat part of him. Why not?
Yeah. Why put him in a barrel when we can pickle him?
Okay, so before we get to the end of this, Clete, back to you.
All right, this one is called Friendship.
Oh, that sounds like a happy story.
Yeah. I used to have this friend named Dan who liked me a lot. He was sort of a dark guy, wore all black all the time, kept his apartment dark all the time, and tended to spend an awful lot of time by himself. I don't actually recall how the two of us started talking and eventually became friends because we weren't really the social types. But, however it happened, we became pretty good friends. Though we were close in age, Dan hadn't really gone through as much as I had in life. I'd been in relationships, both good and bad. He really had spent most of his time alone. I seemed to think that maybe we met on a dating site or something like that and just decided to be friends. He had met someone on the site maybe about 6 months after the two of us became friends, and he became really enamored with them. However, his newfound love was pretty obvious to me as a game player. They lived in different states, first off. Whenever Dan tried to figure out a way for them to get together, it never worked. It was really just a bunch of drama, and I really couldn't tell Dan what I thought because I knew that he would just get mad at me. Anyhow, the day that it all came to a head was on a day where there was a blizzard. My job shut down pretty early in the afternoon and canceled the following day of work because of the feet of snow that was expected. So I drove through a lot of heavy falling snow to get home and planning on not stepping foot out the door for a few days. It was pretty late in the evening, around 11 p.m., when I got a call from Dan. I hadn't heard from him a lot lately because he was so into his significant other. He was so distressed on the phone, and I could barely make out what he was talking about. However, he kept pleading with me to come over to his place because he didn't trust himself to be alone. I definitely didn't want to go out in the blizzard, but of course, I had no problem doing it for a friend. It was difficult to get over to Dan's place. The snow was falling even heavier than before, and it was hard to see anything at all. He didn't live very far from me, but it took me nearly until midnight to get to his place. When I made it there, things began to make a lot more sense. The person he was supposedly in love with had been playing some pretty sick games with him. Although Dan couldn't see it that way, they were supposed to drive up to see Dan for the weekend, but claimed that they had driven halfway, then couldn't drive anymore. They went as far as telling him that they weren't going to kill themselves in the car because they were so upset that they couldn't finish the trip to come see him. Dan offered to go and find them and pick them up, but they eventually hung up and quit answering their phone. So Dan and I were, as usual, hanging out in the dark in his apartment, and there was this extremely strong negative energy in the air, and I was doing all I could do as a friend simply to try to console my friend despite all the bad mojo that he surrounded himself in. They took my mojo. Eventually, although it was hard, I was able to get Dan to calm down enough that he dozed off for a while. I was laying in his bed watching over him when he fell asleep. Once that happened, I just laid there in the dark, looking out at the snow falling outside. I wasn't the type who could usually fall asleep in anyone else's bed, but I had been there for my friend, so I just lay there, watching the snow as he slept beside me. I thought that I heard something in another part of the apartment. I didn't think it was anything at first. However, as I was lying there, several things happened at once. They really terrified me more than I had ever been scared before. Suddenly, a light in the hallway outside Dan's bedroom turned on. I immediately looked over there from the window. I turned my head just in time to see the shadow of someone walking by the doorway into the living room of the apartment. I'm not sure how long I laid there, frozen in terror. Someone had broken into Dan's apartment, but I couldn't figure out how it had happened, and I didn't know how to handle the problem either. Dan woke up and was groggy, asking me if I turned the light on. I told him no, and that I had been in the bed the entire time. I thought someone was in the apartment, and that I would go and check it out. The light suddenly turned off. I am not sure if it was because everything that Dan had been through that night, but he immediately decided to take care of the issue. He got up, walked out of the room, and turned the hallway light on. Then he walked into the living room, and he was gone for a little while. I was still breathing heavily as I waited for something to happen next. I expected to hear some sign of a struggle or some kind of violence. However, I didn't hear anything at all, but it was nerve-wracking waiting. Finally, Dan came back into the room. He turned the hallway light off and then came into the room and sat down on the bed. After a moment, he told me that not only was no one in the house, but the bolt on the door was locked. That meant that if someone had been in the apartment, they couldn't have just left because they couldn't lock the bolt once they had left. I think if Dan hadn't seen the light turn off after he woke up, he might have thought that I had turned the light on, but he witnessed it turning off and was just as confused as I was at first. However, after we allowed ourselves some time to process it all, Dan realized that his significant other had just been playing him the entire time. He recognized that there was a lot of negative energy in his apartment that night, so he thought perhaps that negativity had manifested into something supernatural. I don't know how to feel about that. I saw the shadow of someone walking into the living room. I was sure that someone had to have been in the apartment that night. I even wondered if they had possibly may have gone out through the balcony somehow. However, there were no footprints or anything in the snow there. Neither of us had any real idea of what we witnessed that night, but whatever it was incredibly scary for us both.
Was it a walkout balcony by chance, Clete?
Walkout balcony.
All right, so let's wrap up these Snowtown murders. The body of Clinton Trezise had been found at Lower Light in 1994, but no connection to Bunting was made during this time. And, as mentioned before, the death of Thomas Trevelyan in 1997 was ruled as a suicide. What led police to ultimately find Snowtown were the inquiries to Elizabeth Hayden's disappearance. It was on May 20th, 1999, that the remains of 8 victims had been found by the South Australian police in 6 plastic barrels in an old, disused bank vault. This is what gave the murders the name Bodies in Barrels Murders. I want to be on the naming committee. What are we going to call this? We found a bunch of barrels full of bodies.
There's a bunch of bodies. There's a bunch of bodies in these barrels. I'm getting sick of these motherfucking bodies in these motherfucking barrels. Samuel L. Jackson found it. So, little known fact.
I think he was in the movie, too. It was believed that the bodies in barrels had been moved to several locations throughout South Australia before finding their final destination in Snowtown in 1999. It was suggested that the bodies were moved after the ongoing police investigation had started. They found 2 other bodies buried in Bunting's backyard in Adelaide. Bunting, Wagner, and Hayden were arrested and charged on May 21st of 1999. Vlasakis was arrested on May 26, 5 days later, and at the time of the arrest, he lived in Bunting's house. The trial of Bunting and Wagner lasted almost 12 months, which is the longest in the history of South Australia. Bunting was convicted of committing 11 murders in December of 2003, and Wagner of 10 murders, of which he confessed to only 3. Vlasakis pled guilty to only 4 of the murders. In 2004, Hayden was convicted on 5 counts of assisting with the murders, but only admitted to 2. The jury did not come to any conclusion on those 2 murder charges against Hayden, and another of assisting murder, which caused senior prosecutor Wendy Abram to seek a retrial on those charges. The final count against Bunting and Wagner, which was that of murdering Suzanne Allen, was dropped on May 7, 2007, when the jury was unable to reach a verdict. The fucking jury, man. Bunting, of course, was established and tried as the ringleader, being sentenced to 11 consecutive terms of life imprisonment without the possibility of release on parole. It's only 11 lifetimes. It's not that bad.
600 years.
Wagner was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms under the same conditions, and at his sentencing, he stated from the dock, and I quote, "Pedophiles were doing terrible things to children. The authorities didn't do anything about it. I decided to take action. I took action. Thank you." And
he's like a schizophrenic Punisher.
Yeah, I like how he said thank you at the end. Vlasakis was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences with a non-parole period of 26 years, while Hayden was sentenced to 25 years with a non-parole sentence of 18 years. There were more than 250 suppression orders that prevented publication of these details of the case, but in 2011, a judge had lifted the remaining orders so that producers could film their movie Snowtown, which covered the murders and events leading up to him. So the judge is like, "Oh, you want to film a movie? Cool, we'll just release the rest of the suppression orders, and we're good. Here's the details." So there is a movie called Snowtown that talks about this.
Snowtown.
Mark Hayden was granted parole just this last February in 24, authorities citing his excellent behavior in prison. He was released in April and currently resides in Adelaide Pre-Release Center in Northfield as part of the conditions of his parole. So
how do you get released?
So he was the one who didn't actually kill anyone. He just kind of helped with the disposal part. Yeah,
he was the logistics guy.
Yeah, so he was the 4th one who knew about it and helped him get rid of him. So, yeah.
The UPS of death.
Just last month, man, he was released. The notoriety of these murders actually led to a short-term economic boost of people visiting Snowtown, but it created a lasting stigma. So The Age reported in 2011 that Snowtown would be forever stigmatized due to the association with the murders. So shortly after the discovery of the bodies, the community discussed changing the name. They wanted to change it to Rosetown, but no further actions were taken. So they're like, hey, let's change it from Snowtown to Rosetown. As of 2012, there is a shop in Snowtown that sells souvenirs of the murders.
Soylent Green Freight. You kill it, we ship it to the barrel.
The house in Salisbury North, where Bunting lived and had buried 2 of the bodies, was demolished by its owner. So, since the murders were done, the small farming town has become a grim destination for tourists seeking to explore the dark stories associated with the crime. So, people have been flocking to Snowtown just because of the murders. Like, we don't give a shit about Snowtown. We want to talk about the murders. So, the townsfolk are like, can we be known for something other than all these murders? And they're like, no.
No, you may not.
So, that's it. Those are the Snowtown murders. All right. Well, that is going to wrap us up. Thank you again, Kurtis, for the suggestion of the Snowtown Murders. And thank everybody for your contributions to the show. So we just hit 75,000 downloads on Buzzsprout. So thank you, everybody who contributed to that. That's a really big milestone for us here. And thank you to our paid supporters of the show, Modelo Time. Wait, what the hell? They changed it from Clete Meat. It's I was like, who is this?
You gotta keep
Bill Cleton. Bill Cleton.
Wait, let me see this.
I was like, who is this? Yeah, it's not Clete Meat anymore. He changed it to Bill Cleton.
Bill Cleton? No, it's Bill Cleton. Okay. I've never had relations with Monica Lewinsky.
And thank you to our paid supporters of the show, Modelo Time, Bill Cleton, which was formerly Clete Meat, Kurtis and Laura, Mothman, Devin, Lara, Conklin family, and Lou. Your paid support of the show tremendously helps us out, and we're always looking for new things to do. And now that we've got the audio and visual equipment, we can go anywhere that we want. So let us know where you want us to visit. I think in October we're going to do the Asylum 49.
All right, if you're listening to us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe, as that really helps us get us out there. And as always, thank you for entering the abyss.
Until next time.